We could see an awful lot of faces in a lot of new places next year. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric. Welcome to Out of the Groove. A lot to talk about in today's episode, a lot of speculation, if you will, but I think it's going to be very interesting, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Let's go! And before we can go, we also got to talk about some of the stuff that happened this last weekend at Kentucky. The NASCAR Monster Energy Cup Series has been to back-to-back night races now, Daytona and now Kentucky, so back-to-back Saturday night races. My sleep schedule's been a little off. But Kentucky Speedway did not really impress me as a fan all too much. Martin Truex Jr., who's dominated mile-and-a-half racetracks basically the last year and a half now, won yet again. At one point he had like a 15-second lead over the field. It was utter annihilation. This was a race weekend where a lot of people thought Joe Gibbs Racing, they were really good in qualifying, pretty good in practice. A lot of people thought either the 18, 11, the 20 car, one of them was going to have a very good shot to win this weekend. They all had flashes where they ran well. Kyle Busch led a lot of laps, ultimately finished 5th. Denny Hamlin ended up finishing 4th. Matt Kenseth ran top 5 for most of the first half of the race. He fell back and was involved in a last lap wreck, finished 17th. But Gibbs in general seemed to have decent speed, still not what we're used to seeing from him. In the end, it was the usual suspects finishing at the top of the field. Truex getting the win. Kyle Larson finishing 2nd. More on Larson in a moment. Some of those drivers who I've been talking about on the Chase playoff bubble right now, some of them had decent runs, some of them had not so great runs. Like I said, Denny Hamlin finished 4th, so he furthers his cushion over 17th place right now. Joey Logano managed to finish 8th, but he did not run very well the first half of the race, so he did not get really any stage points, so it was mainly that 8th place finish was about all he got. Clint Bowyer finished 13th. He had an overall so-so points day, ran okay in the first stage. I think he got a few stage points at some point, finished 13th, so not too bad for him. Matt Kenseth, like I said, finished 17th, but he did, like I said, run top 5 first half of the race, so he collected a decent amount of stage points, so he actually probably came out slightly ahead of those other two when looking at the points battle. So in the end, I reported last week how Clint Bowyer had about a 20-so point lead over Kenseth, who was the 16th final spot, and then Logano was, I believe, 3 or 4 points behind Kenseth last week. That's been extended now to 8 points. Clint Bowyer's lead over Kenseth still about the same, so not a lot has changed in terms of the immediate Chase playoff bubble. Fact check me there, it was actually 7-point lead over the bubble, not 8 points. 7 points separating Kenseth and Logano, so still, like I said, not a lot of change. The big shake-up highlight moment of the race was early in stage 2 on a restart when Brad Keselowski got loose underneath Clint Bowyer, spun both of them around, and then ultimately Keselowski collected Jimmy Johnson. Both of them went to the garage, did not get the finishes they were hoping for. Both of them have wins this year, not a big deal in terms of the playoff picture. Neither of them are probably going to compete for the points lead at the end of the regular season, so not a big change there, but disappointing, I'm sure, for a lot of their fans. But speaking of that battle to be the highest point getter at the end of the regular season, let me go back to Kyle Larson. I mentioned him a moment ago. Kyle Larson and Martin Truex Jr. have been locked in a very tight head-to-head battle. Truex has more wins than Larson this year, and he has so many stage wins, but Kyle Larson especially began the year with a bunch of top 2, top 5 finishes, has been very consistent. The two of them have been locked in a neck-and-neck battle for that top playoff spot. And remember, I didn't even know this until about a week or two ago. I forgot all about this rule. The top just overall point getter at the end of the regular season, before the playoffs start, gets an automatic 15 bonus points. That's equivalent to 3 wins. That's equivalent to 15 stage wins, which Martin Truex is just laughing off. He doesn't need that. But that's a big bonus, so there's plenty of good reason for Truex and Larson to be battling for it as aggressively as I guess they are. But unfortunately for Kyle Larson, this weekend is going to see a major hit inflicted upon that 42 car. Announced yesterday on Wednesday this week, it was announced that Kyle Larson's 42 team will be facing a level 1 penalty, which involves a $75,000 fine, a 3-race suspension for crew chief Chad Johnston, and possibly most importantly, a 35-point deduction for them in driver and manufacturer and owner points, however that works. Now, what's the penalty for? Is this a lug nut penalty? Oh my gosh! No, it wasn't lug nuts, and it wasn't rear end housing type stuff that we've seen a lot of penalties for, like LIS inspection stuff. It wasn't anything like that. Something new. This penalty was for a rear brake cooling assembly that apparently did not match NASCAR's required qualifications. Now, that's a new one. We don't hear that one very often, or I don't know if I've ever heard that one, but it's not too surprising. Like I said, they finished 2nd, so they had a good car. Maybe this helped them in some way. That's unfortunate for them. It might kill a lot of the momentum that they've had building up this season. But I think that means this will be very interesting. I mean, we've seen how Kyle Busch, who also this weekend suffered a $10,000 penalty for a loose lug nut. No crew chief suspension this time, so good for him. But we've seen Kyle Busch this year have to deal with, his crew chief, not only his initial crew chief being suspended, but then his secondary crew chief being suspended. We've had to see Kyle Busch deal with that, and he's a veteran driver, so he managed it okay. They don't have a win yet this year, but last few weeks when he had those alternate crew chiefs, they ran okay. Not as well as usual. We saw this week they got Adam Stevens came back, and he was immediately a top 5 car that led a bunch of laps, which is what we're used to seeing from Kyle Busch. But he managed the alternate crew chiefs okay. Kyle Larson, we've raved about him all season. He's obviously the future of the sport, probably a future champion, but we've not yet seen him face major adversity, especially not this season. Not only the $75,000 penalty, which, to big NASCAR teams may not seem like a ton, but that's definitely significant for a penalty. But along with that, now having to go without your crew chief for 3 straight races now, could definitely put a hitch in what's otherwise been a very smooth season for Kyle Larson. At the end of the Kentucky race, he actually had a 1-point lead over Truex. That 35-point penalty obviously, I guess, now puts him 34 points behind Truex, which is already a pretty big deficit that might be hard to overcome. But now having to be without your top crew chief, the guy that, in the case of Larson's basically been with him his entire Cup career so far, to be without him now for 3 races could make things, it's going to make things harder these next 3 races for sure, but it could also make things a little bit harder when he initially comes back. Might take them a couple weeks to get back into the full swing of things, rebuild their momentum, because I think it's safe to say Kyle Larson, he's not going anywhere anytime soon. At the beginning of this year, we thought it might have just been a hot streak, but I think he's proven that that's a championship contending team this year, and it would be a shame to see an instance like this really throw them off their game and mess them up heading into the playoffs. Now again, Kyle Larson, he's a very talented driver, like you said. I don't think this will be too big of an issue for them to overcome. I don't think it really will affect their playoff standing, other than I think it'll make it a lot more difficult for them to catch Truex and retake the points lead. I think now Truex has a pretty decent hold on that for now. Anything could happen. Obviously, still 8 races or something like that until the end of the regular season. Plenty can happen, but Truex has done so well, I don't know that anything will happen. Now, the other big news to talk about before I get into my main topic today is that Aric Almirola, who's missed the last several weeks with a back injury that he sustained earlier this season at a wreck at Kansas, he will be back in the 43 car this next week at New Hampshire. So that's really exciting. Darrell Wallace Jr., who had been filling in for him for the majority of these last few races, he will go back to, I guess his Xfinity team's gone, so he'll go back to hoping he gets a ride for next year. But I must say, after seeing the wreck at Kansas and seeing how much pain it seemed Almirola was in, I am shocked to see him get back in the car this soon. I'm a little surprised he is. I mean, he's been cleared by doctors, he must be feeling good, but in my opinion, this season's already kind of over for the 43 team. I don't see any reason to rush Almirola back into the race car, especially if he's not 100%, or it could be re-aggravated for future events. But kudos to Almirola. He must be feeling good. Obviously, he was cleared by doctors, so it'll be good to see him back in that 43 car at New Hampshire. Now for the main thing I wanted to talk about in this episode. In this episode, I hope it doesn't go too long, but I definitely have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. The big news this weekend, that was sort of teased last week, the big news this week is that Erik Jones, driver, currently rookie for the 77 Furniture Row Racing Team, will move over to Joe Gibbs Racing into the 20 car, replacing veteran Matt Kenseth as of the beginning of next year. Now, this doesn't come as a huge shock to too many people, especially me as a Matt Kenseth fan and an Erik Jones fan and Joe Gibbs Racing fan in general. It's kind of been expected that this might happen, or would very likely happen, for about a year or so now. When it was announced last year that Erik Jones would drive the 77 for Furniture Row Racing, it was kind of cool, actually. I mean, it was a new car for Furniture Row Racing. They've been pretty competitive this year. He's right there in chase contention, potentially, and he's had chances to win races. They're getting better. I think that's been a successful year for Jones so far. But when he signed that deal with Furniture Row Racing, the report was that Joe Gibbs was actually in the room with him. So the overall plan from the beginning was that this would be a 1-year deal for Erik Jones at Furniture Row Racing. He would then come over to Joe Gibbs Racing and either take over the 11 or the 20 car. Now, most people always assumed it would be the 20 car because this is a contract year for, an older Matt Kenseth, and Kenseth has already said he's not going to be at Gibbs next year. But there was speculation that it could be in the 11 car because Hamlin was also in a contract year this year, but a few weeks ago or a couple months ago, he and FedEx announced a multi-year extension, I suppose, to stay in that 11 car and with that sponsorship. So Denny Hamlin is set for Joe Gibbs Racing for at least the next few years. So that obviously turned everyone's attention to the 20 car, and sure enough, that is what is happening. So much like we've seen Chase Elliott take over for Jeff Gordon, or now Daniel Suarez for Carl Edwards, looks like now we will be seeing Erik Jones take over for Matt Kenseth. And not only does this continue a trend now of older, veteran, champion, well-known drivers, leaving the sport now, and a younger crop of drivers filling their places, but it also marks the beginning of what people call NASCAR's silly season. I don't know why they call it silly season. Who came up with that name? When I think silly, I think of like little grade schoolers drawing on each other with crayons. Like, oh, y'all are being silly. Why do we call it silly season? I don't understand the phrase, but that's what's happening now. Matt Kenseth is not the only high-profile NASCAR driver to currently not have a plan announced for next season. There are several others, some we know a little bit about, others we don't know much about, that are also currently not signed on past this season that could go anywhere next year. And I think it might be fun on this week's episode. I've been meaning to do this for a while now. I think this is a good week to do it. I think this is a good time to examine that and possibly speculate and examine which cars and which drivers could end up where next year. Follow me. This is my trusty NASCAR silly season board. The names listed here are some of NASCAR's biggest names whose rides and futures for next season are currently unknown or at least somewhat uncertain. A couple of these are obviously not that way. We'll start at the top here with obviously some ones we currently already know. Dale Earnhardt Jr., you know, he's driven the 88 car for years. He's already announced he is gone at the end of this season, so that's the crossed out line of death right there. Sorry, Junior fans. Erik Jones is the other driver. We already know where he is going. He has already been linked to the 20 car, filling in for Matt Kenseth, or not filling in, replacing ultimately Matt Kenseth in the 20 car for Joe Gibbs Racing. Erik Jones is set up for quite the exciting future. But after Dale Earnhardt Jr. gets crossed out, he's retired. Erik Jones is already going to the 20 car. We have several big names up here, and there's a couple others I didn't even put up here, I don't think, that could be anywhere. So let's go and continue on here at the top. Matt Kenseth, like I said, he's out at Joe Gibbs Racing. No longer going to be in the 20 car. Matt Kenseth, he's 45 years old. He's the oldest full-time driver in the Monster Energy Cup Series right now. Now that being said, Matt Kenseth has said in recent months, as recent as last week, that he does not want to retire anytime soon. He thinks he can drive for several more years. Realistically, I think a lot of teams would be willing to give him a 2 to 3 year contract perhaps, and likely at that point he would basically be gone. No one's going to pull a Mark Martin or a Terry Labonte anytime soon. Matt Kenseth has been highly rumored to take over either the 88 or the 5 car because Kasey Kahne has currently had some sponsorship issues with Hendrick Motorsports. It's no secret, Kasey Kahne fans, that he has not been the driver he once was in the last couple of years. So there's a very good chance that both of these cars will be wide open, and Matt Kenseth, who's already driven for 2 very big, high-profile teams in his career with Roush and Joe Gibbs Racing, could now ultimately make the jump to another one and go to Hendrick Motorsports. Now there are also rumors that he could basically swap rides with Erik Jones and go to the 77 with Furniture Row. He would stay in the Toyota camp, but that would likely mean he'd be moving to a team in Denver, which I don't know necessarily if he would have to move to Denver, but Matt Kenseth, keep in mind, has a family. He's got 3 very young daughters. You know, I don't know that they would really be willing to move from nice, moderately climated North Carolina to the mountains of Denver, of Colorado. I'm not sure how open they'd be to that idea. It might be tough to get a guy in his late or mid-40s like that to do that, but that's also a possibility. And the other big rumor from Matt Kenseth is that he could go to one of the Stewart-Haas racing cars. Danica Patrick, she's had sponsorship issues. Kurt Busch is currently not under contract yet in the 41, although that I feel fairly confident that something might work out there. So there's an also off chance that Kenseth could go to a Stewart-Haas car. Whew. Now there's a lot to talk about with Matt Kenseth because he's probably, of these drivers up here, he's the one who, his options are kind of the most out there. We don't really know where the best fit could be for him because he's been with Gibbs the last few years, and Gibbs doesn't have a spot, so it could be any of these locations could work out for him. If you ask me, for the sake of this board and for the sake of my sanity and being able to sleep at night, I think Matt Kenseth, his most likely bet, and keep in mind, retirement is still a possibility, I think Matt Kenseth will end up in the 88 car for 2018. And you want to hear my logic for that? There's a lot of talks, you know, William Byron and Alex Bowman, a couple drivers here on my list that are currently, these are not current Cup drivers that could be in Cup in the very near future. That's why they're on that list there. William Byron and Alex Bowman, neither have really, Bowman has a little bit of Cup experience, but he's not even in a full-time Xfinity car this year. William Byron dominated in the trucks. He's looked very good this year in the Xfinity cars. He could be on the fast track to the Cup Series. I just dropped my pen. But there's also our talks that maybe Byron should stay in the Xfinity Series one more year, or that maybe William Byron jumps up to the 5 car of Kasey Kahne's, while Alex Bowman takes over the 9 full-time in Xfinity. That could be a possibility, and in that case, it would make sense, I think, for Rick Hendrick to take Matt Kenseth, put him in the 88 car, and then he would have a team of Jimmy Johnson and Matt Kenseth, 2 longtime veterans, good friends, champions, mentoring 2 younger drivers, Chase Elliott and William Byron, 2 very likely future champions of the sport. That's my very long explanation as to why I think Matt Kenseth will probably end up in the 88. Let's move on. Danica Patrick, it's no secret, she's been big for NASCAR since she came into the Cup Series. She's never had the success that I think a lot of people expected from her, but she, for a long time, started to improve. Unfortunately, it just seems like the last couple of years, she's kind of stalled out. And as much as I like Danica and as much as I want her to succeed, I really think this is very likely her last year in NASCAR. You know, the reason she got to the Cup Series as quickly as she did is because, 1, she was very high profile, and 2, because she had a powerful sponsor in GoDaddy who was very pushy and very active in trying to get her a more and more spotlight, a bigger and better, you know, seat, and that's how she got into the Cup Series as fast as she did. Now, unfortunately, GoDaddy's been gone. She's had some off and on sponsorship issues the last year or 2. Technically, I think she is under contract for next year, but Stewart-Haas Racing has the option to cancel that and basically shut that down if they so choose. And unfortunately for Danica Patrick fans, I don't think she's going to be in NASCAR next year. I don't think she'll be in the Cup Series at least. So, yeah, she's also going to get the line of death. And that's a hard one for me to write right there. I'm not going to lie. I really like Danica Patrick, and I really wish they had not rushed her to the Cup Series as fast as they did, because by the time she was towards the end of her nationwide, it was then called the Nationwide Series career, she was competitive, consistently running top 5, top 10, at times competing for wins. She never quite got a win, but she was close a few times, and it was fun to watch. And I was really frustrated when they rushed her to the Cup Series like that, because she clearly wasn't ready. She's clearly in over her head, and unfortunately she's just never really been able to pick it up the way I think they hoped she would, and that's why I just think it's tough. She's driving a car that realistically we think should be running 15th to 20th place at least each week, and she's running 25th to 30th with it at most racetracks. So that's just unfortunately not good enough for a big team like Stewart-Haas Racing, and it's not been good enough for sponsors lately. So I think she will be out of NASCAR at the end of the year. So tough the way it is. It's a business. But let's go ahead and move on. It doesn't get a lot easier for me here because I know Kasey Kahne, he's one of my all-time favorite drivers. I know he's a lot of you guys' favorite drivers, but like I said earlier, Kasey Kahne has not been his usual self. When he first came to the Cup Series in the mid-2000s, driving that 9 car, he kind of looked like Kyle Larson does today. We thought he could be a future champion. He was taking a team that we didn't always see run up front, and he was running up front with it, winning some races. Then he went to Red Bull Racing in the 4 car, kind of was okay there. Was a chase contending team, you know, on that side. But then he got the ride with Hendrick Motorsports in the 5. Immediately, for a few years there, he was a chase team. He, at times, even looked like a championship contending team. He won a lot of races. Looked good, but the last 2 or 3 years, really since 2014, and even then I think he won 1 race, but it was, even that year, he struggled a lot. Kasey Kahne has just not been able to get back to the level we expected from him, and I just think he's also had sponsorship issues, and similarly to Danica Patrick, I believe Hendrick Motorsports has the option to eliminate that contract at the end of the season, and I too think that will likely be the case. Now, there's a distinct handful of places Kasey Kahne could end up, because he's not super old, and like I said, in the past, he proved that he could win races. He's not an untalented driver, to say the least. Unfortunately, Hendrick Motorsports, there's, much like Joe Gibbs Racing, there's just not enough seats to fill with as many talented drivers as they have. So Kasey Kahne, I'm not going to 100% say he's going to retire. If you ask me, I think it's very likely he'll be out of the Cup Series by the end of this year. But I would not be surprised to see him end up possibly in one of these Stewart-Haas Racing cars should one of those seats become available to him, or potentially even the 21 car, and I'll get to that a little bit in a second. Wood Brothers Racing's been around for the longest time. They've been known, I mean, they had Trevor Bayne drive that car for a while. Ryan Blaney's the first driver in a long time to really give them a lot of success. And I think Kasey Kahne, if Ryan Blaney were to leave Wood Brothers Racing, which I'll get to again in a second, I think that could be a seat that Kasey Kahne could possibly find a little bit of rejuvenation in. But for now, because I think it is probably the slightly most likeliest scenario, I'm going to cross Kasey Kahne's out. Oh, that's another really hard one to do. I love all 3 of these drivers, and they got lines through them. Ah, well, that's rough. Let's move on. Yet again. Now we move on to Brad Keselowski, and I have him on this list just because he's a very popular driver, very talented driver, very well known, but he's currently not under contract past this season. But in my opinion, I think it's safe to say he's been with Penske basically the last several years. He won a championship with them. He's had Miller Lite backing him as a major sponsor. They don't really show many signs of backing out anytime soon. I think he's a great representative for them. I think Brad Keselowski will eventually sign another deal with Penske Racing. I just think they maybe hit some snags in contract negotiations, maybe over little things here and there, but I think a deal will get done. So this is a pretty short and easy one to say to me. I think Keselowski stays in the 2 car for at least the next couple of years. He's been really good. I think it just makes sense. And I'll go ahead and make this quick. I think Kurt Busch, very likely, he's in a very similar scenario with Brad Keselowski. He's been in that 41 car the last couple of years. He won the Daytona 500 this year. He's had pretty good success, and he's been a chase team every single year he's been with them. He's been a pretty good contender. I read recently there was some contract or some discussions with Monster and whether or not they would stay on to sponsor both that car and the series sponsorship. You know, they might just stick with just the Monster Energy Cup Series sponsorship show. So that could present some issue for Kurt Busch. But if you ask me, I think a deal will get done. He will ultimately stay in the 41 car for Stewart-Haas Racing. That's if you ask me. I think that's the most likely scenario. Again, guys, I don't have any sources on this. I'm reading the same article as most of y'all are reading. This is just my opinion. I'd like to share it, you know. Now, I want to go ahead and get here to Ryan Blaney, another one of the most talented young drivers in the sport. He won earlier this year at Pocono, and good chance he could win again this year. He's been very talented. He's been very close a few times, won some stages. Anyway, he's with Wood Brothers Racing, and there's no doubt in my mind, similarly to the way Joe Gibbs, for the longest time, always assumed Eric Jones would come to Gibbs. Now he is going to be with Gibbs. I think Roger Penske has had the same deal kind of going in his head with Ryan Blaney. Y'all know Wood Brothers Racing, that 21 car, is an affiliate satellite team of Penske Racing. And remember this, Penske Racing is only a 2-car team currently. There has been rumors, rumblings, Roger Penske himself has suggested that there is a possibility that they could open up a 3rd team. So let me tell you this, guys. I wouldn't be super duper surprised to see Ryan Blaney not necessarily in the 21 car next year, but possibly in the 12 car next year, teaming up with Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski, making Penske yet again continue to make them one of the biggest and most formidable teams in NASCAR Cup Series racing. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to some of these other drivers that I have circled here. William Byron, Alex Bowman, and Bubba Wallace. These are some three pretty big names that have been linked to possible Cup rides. That's the vibe I'm getting from a lot of people I see around the internet and around the NASCAR community, that especially these top two drivers that are currently in the Hendrick/Junior Motorsports stable, very likely they end up with Cup Series rides in the next year or two. So I'll start with William Byron. He's really broken out this year in the Xfinity Series. He was really strong in the Truck Series last year. This year, he's won a couple races already. He's been in contention for more races. Remember, he lost to Denny Hamlin on that photo finish and then proceeded to win the next 2 races in a row. So William Byron clearly got a lot of talent. He is very young, though. And I think that is worth mentioning. We haven't really seen any really, really young drivers come into NASCAR and have immediate success, really ever. I mean, I think back to Joey Logano a few years ago when he was 18 years old when he took over the 20 car, and yeah, he wasn't that great at first. He's obviously grown up to be a great driver now in the 22, but at first he wasn't that good. But that being said, I think Rick Hendrick is very high on William Byron, and he has good sponsorship possibilities. With Axalta has been very big for Hendrick Motorsports, and with Junior retiring in the 88, unless they stay on for Matt Kenseth, which you never know, could happen, I think it's a very likely chance that Axalta follows William Byron into the Cup Series next year for a ride in Kasey Kahne's, formerly Kasey Kahne's, 5 car. So if you had to give me, what did I just do? Anyway, I think William Byron will be in the 5 next year in the Cup Series. That's my opinion. I'd be curious to see what you guys think. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. What about Alex Bowman? Wasn't he was the guy who filled in for Junior last year some? Isn't he supposed to be in the 88 car? Where does he fit in on this picture? And the answer to that is, he doesn't. Nothing against Alex Bowman, but he doesn't, like I said, he doesn't even have a full-time Xfinity ride this year. He's not racing any NASCAR series full-time this year, and I just think that's a little much to throw a driver like that, who really hasn't shown any top-level success the last couple of years, into a high-profile ride like the 88 or the 5 without at least giving him a year or so of preparation beforehand. For that reason, and I kind of hinted at it earlier, with William Byron, in my opinion, heading to the 5 car, that will free up the 9 team in the Xfinity Series, the 9 Junior Motorsports car, which is always very competitive. That will free it up for Alex Bowman to take over. I guess that's not on my list, but yeah, I guess I'll put a line through him, but not because he's out or retiring, just because he's not going to be in the Cup Series. He'll be in the Xfinity Series full-time, but Alex Bowman wouldn't surprise me if once Matt Kenseth ultimately does retire in the next probably 2 years or so, wouldn't surprise me if then Alex Bowman does jump up and take the 88 car. Unless some other newer, younger hotshot comes up out of nowhere, then we could have a completely different discussion. So when I look at this list, we still have the 10 car and the 77 car as open right now. And the only driver I haven't talked about yet is Bubba Wallace Jr. I have him up here just because he's been linked to a lot of cars. I don't necessarily think he's going to be in the Cup Series next year. I should have also mentioned that Richard Petty Motorsports is their 43 car. I think technically is also going to be open, but I think it's very likely Almirola stays with that team for at least one more year. Bubba Wallace Jr., he filled in admirably for the 43. I think he definitely deserves to be in an Xfinity car full-time. As you guys know, or maybe you don't know, Roush Fenway Racing shut down the 6 car in the Xfinity Series, which had been Darrell Wallace Jr.'s ride for the last couple of years. That car is no longer racing, so currently Darrell Wallace Jr. does not have a car in NASCAR at all, and I think that is unfair. I think he definitely deserves a car. He's shown that he has the skill to drive a car, and I hope he finds one. If I had to link him to either of these cars, the only one I think he even has a remote possibility of being in as early as next season is the 10 of Danica Patrick. I don't see that happening, though. The only reason I see that is even a possibility is because they're both Fords. Bubba Wallace has been a Ford driver his career. The 10 car is a Ford car. That's the only reason I could even see it happening. But he's typically been a Roush Fenway team driver. That is not a Roush car. I don't see that happening. I think Darrell Wallace Jr., hopefully he gets right in the Xfinity Series, but I don't see anything happening in the Cup Series next year. So that leaves us with the 10 car and the 77 car left over. So who fills those rides? And I presented a few scenarios where even guys like Kasey Kahne, maybe even Danica Patrick, does ultimately get a ride in one of these cars. Like I said, Danica could always end up still with the 10 car. They could find a sponsor at some point, and that could all work out. Kasey Kahne could end up in the 77 car. We could have some other drivers end up in the 77 car. People we haven't even talked about could end up in the 77. Christopher Bell or some of these other younger Toyota drivers like Matt Tifft maybe even could sneak in and get one of these Toyota cars like the 77. Personally, I'm not 100% sure the 77 car will be in NASCAR next year. The 10 car, on the other hand, I'm pretty sure someone will fill that seat. I have no idea who it will. 77, you maybe get the impression this could have just been a loner year for that car. This is just kind of an experiment. I'm not sure that it will stick out and stay with them. That will be something I'm very interested to see, because it's clear the 77's had some speed this year. They haven't been as good as Truex, but nobody's been as good as Truex. So that is my board. Very incomplete, very odd, very awkward. But that is my NASCAR silly season board at this point in the year. So let me know what you guys think. Oh my goodness, that was an awful lot of talking. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys were able to get some information out of that. Hopefully it made some sense to you. Maybe you agree with some of my selections. Maybe you don't agree with very many of my selections. Let me know your opinions in the comments below. Maybe some new news will come out today. Like I said, this is the start of NASCAR's silly season, and so it's very likely in the next month or two we could see several of these announcements be made that maybe end up the way I thought they would. More than likely don't. So it's going to be an interesting everything's going to be in flux for the next couple months. As for New Hampshire this weekend, I'm picking my boy Matt Kenseth to win this weekend, and I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, Eric, what are you doing? But hey, keep in mind, Matt Kenseth has been the best driver at New Hampshire the last few years. Keep in mind that Joe Gibbs Racing has looked faster the last few weeks. Keep in mind that Matt Kenseth is under a lot of pressure to perform now that it's been outed that he doesn't have a ride for next year. I think Matt Kenseth lives up to the hype. I think he gets it done this week in New Hampshire. I could be just thinking very wishfully, but hey, a guy can dream, right? I'm looking forward to New Hampshire. Anything will be better than the race we saw at Kentucky this weekend. Hopefully not one car dominates and runs away to a 15-second lead. I don't want to see that again anytime soon. But anyway, y'all, thank you for watching this slightly different version of Out of the Groove. Hopefully this didn't eat up too much of your afternoon, but hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to you guys for watching. You can support me on Patreon. You can follow me on Twitter, all that other stuff. I talk mostly about NASCAR stuff on there, so if you want to talk racing with me, I will be more than happy to. So check me out there. Check out Double E Cup Series mid-season right now, Season 8. Those are up probably on the side somewhere. You can check those out. And that's not a lot else I got to talk about. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll see y'all next Thursday. Have a good one.